And we are live. Welcome to Books and Beer. I'm really excited to bring you today's guest. I'm excited about all my guests. I don't want to upset anyone, but I'm especially excited about this guy because he kept me waiting so long. We were just talking about this before I hit go. The man, the legend, Ernest Dempsey. Welcome to Books and Beer. Nice to see you, my friend.
Thank you, everybody.
You hear that applause all over the globe? People are.
I'll do what the politicians do and pretend to point at people that aren't really there.
Yeah. How's the family? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, good to see you. So it's noon where you are in Tennessee. I assume you're at home.
That's right. In the Eastern time zone, it's officially noon.
Good stuff. Well, it's afternoon, so that's all good for you to. I mean, you're not joining me on the beers today. You mentioned earlier.
No, I'm having some water with some orange Mio or some regular water. Either way, I'm just trying to stay hydrated.
It's important. What's the temperature for you at this time of the year?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let's see. Right now, it is. I don't know. It's not cold outside. It was cold this morning, but we're
and you're going to give me it in Fahrenheit, aren't you? So it's going to make no sense to me.
Yeah, it's 58 degrees Fahrenheit right now. So it'll be 65 today, but it was like, in the 30s last night. But tomorrow it's going to be 70. So I'm going to see if I can get out enough words by lunchtime to maybe see if I can still swing the clubs tomorrow.
Nice. So are you sort of an outdoors lover? Do you spend time outdoors, walking, hiking, that sort of thing? Are you?
No, I mean, I love the outdoors. Yes, I love being outside, and I do not like moving much when I'm outside. So outside, and I have some friends that'll be like, they'll make fun of me for that because they love to do the whole hiking thing and all that.
Yeah.
But and one of my buddies was texting me and said, "Can't believe we've already been to half of the national parks here in the United States." And I said, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, we've been to half of them, and we're going to this one and this one and this one." And I was like, "That sounds like a nightmare to me." Because I don't care about. There's two things I don't like doing. I don't like hiking for the sake of hiking. Like I like to see things, but I also don't like being in a car for like more than 6 hours, really more than 4 hours. And then when we get to the 6 hour mark, I'm like, I'm going to steer us into this overpass. So,
I'm the same. I don't like driving, particularly if I've got to drive. That's the thing.
Yes.
I'm there thinking, I'm wasting all of this brain power just avoiding other things when I could be doing so much more with it.
I could be doing so much more with my time, like liking people's Instagram posts. Or
exactly. Watching videos of cute animals, all sorts of things.
Which I've been doing a lot of lately because apparently that's what my kid's into right now is watching cute cat videos on YouTube. So that's fun.
Wow. That is fun. No, I only asked that because I wonder sort of, I know a lot of writers who do the whole, I have an idea and then I go out for a walk and climb a mountain and then it sort of, it becomes a more sort of fully formed idea,
Yeah, for sure. No, I do that. And I look, I love the outdoors. I love camping and whether it's in a tent or a camper or whatever, but I just don't like the whole like walking thing. Like I go for a walk for exercise and I go for a walk like Sunday, I guess it was Sunday or maybe it was Monday. I went out for a walk for 20 minutes because I needed to figure out like, okay, what does this next scene look like? So I got out of the studio here and I went to the nightclub, as you can see with the lights.
Yeah, I like that, man.
So I got out of the studio and went for a 20-minute walk. Got a little over a mile in, but I was like, I was taking notes on my phone as I was walking. And I was like, oh, I should do this. This is what should happen here. And the story kind of unfolded. And I really liked that. That's a very helpful thing to get.
I think I'm the same. You sort of get you write yourself into a bit of a bad mood. I always find, I'm there going, I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know what should be the next thing, and then as changing the sort of vibe, changing the environment, sort of helps through that, I think.
Yep, I'm big into exercise, so I work out quite a bit, and you can't tell because I'm not like ripped, but I do try to work out and exercise quite a bit, so that helps clear the mind too. To break up the monotony of the day of sitting here and burning my brain.
Yeah, and firstly, congratulations on finishing the book this week. I saw on Instagram or Facebook whilst I was scrolling looking for cat videos, and you came across. I was like, that's a funny looking cat, but he's finished the book, so great.
Yep. I got the next Sean Wyatt's done, so that'll be probably out in January. I just got the ETA from my editor today, so should have that out mid to late January. I'll probably do late January because mid-January people are still recovering from their holiday expenditures, and so people blow out the budget in the holidays. So I'll probably wait and let everybody get paid again at the end of the month, so that
it's a good idea.
I can take more of their money. But
yeah, it's an investment.
But no, I do think about it like that because you release a book certain times of the week or certain times of the month, and not everybody has been paid, and maybe money might be tight. So I try to be aware of that so that everybody can get it at the same time, so no one has to wait.
Yeah, so it's a good idea, actually. I think I've never thought of that. But so you would go for the end of the month on like a weekend, as an example. Would that be your sort of thing?
I always release on Fridays, and
right.
I think some other authors are starting to do that now, but when I started this 10 years ago, this is the 10th anniversary of the real release of the Sean Wyatt series. I released book 1 in 2010, but it was through a vanity press, and they didn't do Kindle and all that. And I was so mad. I was like, hey, I emailed them and I said, hey, can you guys convert this to Kindle format? Because I think Kindle's catching on, and I think it's a big deal.
Might be a big thing.
Oh yeah, this is going to be something that you guys should be involved in. And they were like, no, we don't do that. And this is a big company that I gave like $2,000.
Wow.
And they and they were like, no, we don't do that. I'm like, wow, okay. So I learned HTML at least enough to do that in Word docs, and formatted it for Kindle, re-released it in December of 2011. So this is 10 years since I released the Kindle version of that book. And
that is so exciting. 10 years.
Yeah.
When did that become your job? When did that become your sort of full-time thing?
Well, it's never been my job. It's
right.
I mean, it is my job technically.
I know, you know what I mean. When did you stop working elsewhere? Because you worked in schools, didn't you? I've read somewhere.
Yeah. So so when I was 15 years old, I started as a landscaper in the summers, and then I worked. You didn't want my whole job career. My freshman year in high school, I worked at Taco Bell. So I was a high school guidance counselor for 12 years, from 2003 to 2015. And I quit in April of 2015.
Wow. That's an interesting job. I was a teacher in high school, English teacher, so can feel.
Really? I don't. Yeah. Did I know that?
Maybe not. I don't know.
Enough about me. Let's talk about you, Luke.
Fine. Flip this round. Whose show is this anyway? But yeah, sure. No, I was an English teacher at a secondary school, so 11 to 16-year-olds for 7 years, and left in 2020. I handed in my resignation the week before the school closed because of the pandemic, and then was like, oh right, so this is how so this is how it's going to go, which in a way it worked quite well because it gave me a lot of time to get on with the writing at that time, that I was sort of building up those first couple of books at that stage. In a way it was really scary though, because it was like, I don't know what's going to happen here, and I'm leaving a job to do it, but
no benefits, no steady salary, the swings, the ups and downs. So I want to ask you this because it's my show. Um, I, I, I have to know. So when you quit your job, okay, so this is something that I faced, and I've spoken to several authors that said the same thing. When they finally quit to start writing full time, their production went down initially. Did that happen to you? Because
I think. Go on. Sorry, what were you going to say?
well, here's what I'll sort of like put brackets around that for you. So it's for me and for some others that I spoke to, the problem was when you have a regular job, you wake up early to write your book, you work on your lunch break, and you go fast and hard, and you're like, I got to get this done. I'm doing this because this is what I want to be, and this is what I want to do. I want to leave this other life behind. I'm pushing hard for this, right? And you're consistent, and you work weekends, and you do all those things. And then all of a sudden, you quit your job, and you have all the time in the world to run errands and watch videos on YouTube and maybe go for a run or a nice walk or play golf or meet some friends.
Drink beer at midday.
Yeah. All of a sudden, you're like you're still almost at the same production level you were before. Like you should be at like triple, and you're really not. And did you ever struggle with that? It's okay to say no. You're clearly a more disciplined person than me.
There's a couple of interesting points that I want to say about this. Firstly, it certainly felt like my productivity got less. But I think that's because your feeling of productivity is linked to how busy you are as opposed to what you actually complete. And I think this comes from someone in a job, essentially, you're judged often on how busy you are as opposed to what you actually get done, don't you? Now I know I get more done, but I work less because I work at times when I'm engaged in the process. I work at times when I am actually focused, and if I'm not focused, if I'd rather go and do something else, I'll go and do it. I don't sit and look out the window. I think, oh, that's a sign that I should be going outside and doing something else. You know.
Yeah.
And secondly, my point to this, and this is something we see on our sort of author communities, so many people who leave the awful job behind and the horrible boss and become that horrible boss to themselves. You know, and they sit there moaning about, I haven't managed to do this, I haven't managed to do that. And I just think, actually, you fought so long and hard to get yourself out of a situation where you had to work all the time that just stop working all the time.
Yeah.
You know, and enjoy it. You know, drink beer at lunchtime, go for long walks to think about something. You know, take your daughter to the cinema, whatever it is that lights you up, and do that, because I think that will probably, in the long run, make you a better writer as well.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I work in bursts. So like I'll like so far today, I think I have 1,200 words written, right? And
Good stuff.
Yeah, but I've been at it since 9. But I was like screwing around doing this other thing. That 1,200 words was really like 30 minutes of work.
Yes, that's it, isn't it?
So it reminds me, so I tell people this all the time. Peter Gibbons was my spirit animal. The movie Office Space.
I don't know it.
You know, he sits down with the two Bobs, those two consultants that are there to like figure out how to make the office more productive. And so he's just being really real with them, just super real with them. And he's like, I'd say in any given day, I get 15 minutes of real, actual work done. And he's like, I'll sit at my computer, you know, I'll usually come in about 15 minutes late. And then I'll sit down at my desk and just space out for like 30 minutes or whatever. And then I'll go get and he talks about all these things. And in that 15 minutes, he's still probably doing as much as everybody else, if not more. And that's how I always felt too, like in my job. My job as a guidance counselor was a lot of data entry, right? Like transcript stuff.
Oh, really? Right.
Kids transferring in from other schools, and you know, you got to figure out how every state's different. So they call classes different things. Some people are on blocks, so they get 1 credit for a semester, and others get half a credit for some. It's all silly. So I would be sitting there doing that sort of stuff all the time. I could fly through it. Now, I wasn't always accurate, and the registrar would call me like twice a week. And like, Ernie, did you come in here for a minute? And I'm like, oh, hey, what's this? What's this credit right here? And I'm like, yeah, that's.
I can picture this blue rinse, cardigan wearing,
Lane Thompson is her name, and she was an angel to me. Like,
oh, bless.
I probably should have been fired from that job after year 2. Just because year 1, they were probably like, he'll come around. He'll be all right. He'll figure it out. And then at the end of year 2, that's your grace period year. They should have probably just fired me then. But they didn't, because the principal liked me. And so they hired me for that 3rd year. And then all of a sudden you got tenure. And now there's a whole process to get rid of somebody. So Lane Thompson, she was my guardian angel.
Oh, brilliant.
Kept me there. But yeah, anyway, I'm sorry. I sidestep.
Do you find though, because I still find actually that the fact that I spent so long in a school, which I think is a real sort of it's a real sort of coalface of people, isn't it? You meet people from all sorts. Certainly in the British system, I don't know what sort of school that it was that you worked at, but you meet people from all walks of life, all sorts of places, all nationalities, religions, creeds, races, whatever you might want to do, And it has given me so many sort of character ideas or things that could, figures of speech or things that could happen, or names or sort of traits within people just from those years that I spent there. I think there was. Yeah. Did you find the same in your sort of education?
Yeah. So for me, I was in an interesting place because about 30 minutes south of here is like North Georgia is right across the street. I live in Tennessee, but Georgia is like the mailbox across the street.
Right? Oh, right. Yeah.
So like half of my neighborhood's in Georgia, half's in Tennessee. So I used to, where I worked was in North Georgia and Dalton, Georgia. And the school where I was working was around 55. At the time, Dalton High School, I think, was about 55% Hispanic. And most of those kids were Mexican. There were some Guatemalans sprinkled in and a Colombian kid that was really funny. But, and then the second school I worked was more like 65, probably 65% Hispanic. And so I didn't get as much variety. I had Latino kids, white kids, black kids, and a few Asian kids, right? But I still got a really good look at the cultures of those different families. And especially with like the Mexican families and some of the Korean families. I grew up with a bunch of Korean kids anyway. So, but like we had Japanese exchange students that would come in. We had a Chinese exchange student that I'm still friends with. She was great. This one kid that transferred in from Japan didn't speak a lick of English, like nothing, not a word. And I'm sorry, there was one word that he knew how to speak. And this is what makes the story so funny. And I knew what the word was going to be before like he even said it. And he comes in and he's got a translator, this guy that's like, I guess his exchange father, like they were going to host him. And this guy says to me, so he can't speak any English except for one word. And I said, is it baseball? And he goes, how did you know? And I said, well, it's baseball. And I said, you want to play baseball? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, I'm good friends with the coach. I'm sure he'd love it. So, the next time the kid came in, I spent like the weekend learning a few phrases in Japanese. And so just to make him feel more welcome. And he was a great kid. He was awesome. He went out for baseball, made the team, and it was really cool. But yeah, you get to see in schools, you get like this, depending on where you are, you can get like sort of a microcosm of, or like not a micro, but you can get like a buffet of international cultures, of familial cultures, of socioeconomic cultures. I learned a lot.
But also, because they're young people, they haven't got the filter yet that adults might have. Oh, so you'll go to that situation with adults, and they won't speak their mind because they've sort of been indoctrinated that that's a bad idea, you know. Whereas if a kid's bored, they'll tell you, won't they? If the kid doesn't want to do something, they'll tell you. You know?
And the second school I worked in was, some people would call it an alternative school, but the kids in that school were not on track to graduate on time, and that's why we existed, to sort of catch them up. And oh, sorry, I'm just looking at the comments.
Yeah, it's frozen. I can see you. Can you see me? Am I working?
See you, and you can hear me, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Fiona, it must just be you. Wiggle the cable. We will come to the comments in a minute and say hello to everyone.
Sorry, I got distracted. You see,
hello.
I get distracted.
No.
What was I talking about? The kids?
The second school you taught at was like a alternative place.
Yeah, so those kids had even less filters, because a lot of them were in trouble because they were, some of them were just mischievous, right? Like they were just mischievous kids that would like talk way too much in class, and they would always get in trouble. And I'm like, oh, those are my people, because that was me. I always got all the way through grad school. I had professors telling a 23-year-old guy to stop talking in class, right? Like 24 years old. I think, when did I finish grad school? 27? I took a while. But it was like, you know, I'm a 27-year-old man being told to stop
be
talking
quiet
so much in class. Let that sink in. That's me. So, yeah, I those kids though, they had really no filters. Like at the other school, they tried to like observe a sort of sense of propriety in certain ways. Like they knew the lines not to cross. These kids kicked sand on the line on their way over it. Like they were just sweeping dirt on the line so they would never see it again. And sometimes I'd have to say to them, like especially I was coaching I started the boys soccer team there, football, as you guys call it. You invented it. You should be able to tell us what to call it, frankly. Just like we wouldn't try to call hockey something else. Like the Canadians invented it. They can call it hockey if they want to. But I had to tell these boys on my soccer team, I had to really I had to be, I had to remind them gently every now and then, like, you can't say that. Like, like I know that you physically can say that and you don't see the problem with it, but you shouldn't say that, because you're going to like hurt somebody's feelings, or it's not nice, or they were as raw as can be. And I loved that about them, because I could screw around with them too. And it was great, but they had to learn, like, I'm sure they eventually figured it out, but they had to learn some things along the way about society. And
oh, absolutely. And that was one of the things I enjoyed. We'll come back to this in a moment. I'm enjoying this conversation. Let's have a quick look through the comments and see who's joining us. We know Fiona's here. Hello, Fiona. She goes on to say that she's in a hotel. Fiona, where are you? Oh. What are you doing? Where are you? Let us know.
Hotel.
Alison's here. Hi, Luke and Ernie. Great to see you.
Alison. Oh, it's nice to meet you.
That's it. Ray is here, and Ray says he's got his. He talked about.
He's on Reedsy. Excellent.
That was it, Reedsy. Where's that comment? I can't see it now. I've lost it.
Know. I've never been on the other side of StreamYard like this. Normally, I'm the one clicking the comments and putting them up there.
How does that feel?
It feels good. I'm glad I feel not responsible right now. Can you just run my show every Friday? And
yeah, sure, absolutely.
People might like it better. They like your accent. I like your accent better than mine.
So I like yours too. I think that the world's big enough for both our accents, mate. They don't have to.
I've got a billion of them.
Do you? Are you good at accents? Here's something I've started doing. I've noticed that I do it. When I write a character in a different accent, I find myself pretending to do that accent. Do you know what I mean? To sort of see how they would sound. When you're there typing, do you sort of say things out loud? You know?
No, I don't do that. But there's times when I think about it, and I might want to start. When I think about a character like that, I might try to hear it in my head, but I don't actually start talking, because you have to be a fool to do something like that, right? I mean, imagine my kid walking by and seeing me talking to myself in some foreign accent. He must think I'm crazy. So
No, she wouldn't. She'd just be like, that's what my dad does. Talks to himself in foreign
he does
accents.
it all the time. He might be from Dublin one day and London the next. You never know where he's going to be from. So,
Mate, he's a great.
there's one thing that they've learned, Mr. Luke Richardson, and that is in Mother Russia, the beer is always vodka.
I like that.
I'm
I
not
like that.
drinking vodka right now. I'm just drinking.
I'm drinking. This is my third beer.
Dude, I'm so proud of you. My
Wallonia.
goodness.
Yeah. So I'm
Listen, from all of us in Tennessee, bravo. I'm very proud of you.
Steve Moore says 5 out of 10 for the English, 8 out of 10 for Geldof, 9 out of 10 for the Rusky.
That's rubbish. First of all, I've heard Steve Moore's English accent. It's not good. Look, I'll take 5.
More Irish than more Northern Irish than Dublin.
Thank you, Fiona. That too. Look, my whole thing is that I am not from those places, so I hear things and then I try to replicate. I don't even really try; it just happens, right? So if you put me like with those 3 beverages that you just had right there, if you gave me 3 of those and I was just hanging out with you, right? I wouldn't. What I did a minute ago was just joking around, but I would actually start accidentally talking like you, right? Because I'm like an audio chameleon. So I was a singer in a rock band for like 15 years.
Were you? That's interesting.
Yeah, and so we would do a lot of cover songs. We also did our own music, but when we did covers, I wanted it to sound like the singers who originally sang those songs. So I would, I just had this knack for replication, right? And so I think that's where it comes from. So I do these crazy accents, and when I do an English accent, people are like, "No, that's not right. You sound like somebody like you would say, no, you sound like you're mixing up regions, right?" Because
I enjoyed it. I thought it was great.
Well, because I was trying to replicate you. So as
I see.
Yeah. So as you were talking, I was paying attention to your inflection, and then I was like, yeah, yours is actually pretty easy. But then, like, if I were to talk to Allison or Sam or Steve or Mark Dawson or James or some of those guys, like it would start getting really muddled, and I would have certain words that sounded like the way they said them, and one word that sounded like you said them. And so I almost got caught on that one time. I was on a golf trip with some friends, and we were at this bar late one night, and this English girl from, I can't remember which town she was from, but she was serving our table, and one of my buddies goes, "Dude, you got to do your British accent thing." And I was like, no. I said, I can't do it with legit English folk because like they'll know.
In the real world as well, not online,
Right. To any American, they're like, "Wow, he's really good at that, man." How long did you I mean, they really think it. Like they're like, well, "How long have you lived here in America? When'd you come over?" And I'm like, it came over, about a decade ago.
1750.
1800 was when my family first arrived in Savannah, Georgia. To like my buddies and whatever, they're like, it's entertaining and they think it's great, but to legitimate folk from those places, not so much. And so I was like, I'm not doing it, Ben. And he's like, you got to do it. And I'm like, $20. They're like,
that was your price.
So the guys threw it some money, and I was like, all right. So she comes back and I start doing the accent. And she's like, where are you from? And I'm like, she's young, she's this young, pretty girl who's like, I don't know, 25, 26 years old, maybe 24. And the only thing that came to my mind, I don't know why. I've never been to the UK, okay? Except next summer.
That needs to change, by the way.
Next summer. Look, whether
are you?
Yeah, whether they let me
fantastic.
into the SPF Live or not, doesn't matter. I'm coming, and I'm going to say hello to everybody.
Oh,
So-
wow. That would be great.
But I have no idea why this town popped into my mind. But I said Coventry. She goes,
Coventry.
she goes, didn't miss a beat because I had like ordered whatever I was getting right in that accent, and that's why she like looked at me and asked where I was from. I was like, Coventry. And she goes, you don't sound like you're from Coventry. And I was like, well, I am. Sorry.
One of the things.
And I had to do the accent the whole night, by the way. We were there like
Yeah, that's
2
the
hours.
problem, isn't it?
Oh.
That's the problem. We
Yeah,
I remember
it doesn't matter. You can just roll with it. But it was it was so funny. I mean, immediately she was like, something's off with this dude. Like, this is not right. He's not from Coventry. I'm not sure he's from the UK. I think he's messing with me. Like, and then I keep messing with her, the poor thing. We tipped her well, which I found out is not a thing in the UK either. Tipping.
No,
So,
but it can be. You are able to. You can leave a tip, but you're not obliged to.
When I was in Germany, I went in '94, but like it was in high school, so I wasn't like in my career yet. So I go back in 2004. So 10 years later, totally different looking country, by the way. Like Berlin had changed.
Well, you went just a couple of years after reunification.
I went, when
94.
there were still pieces of the wall there and all that.
Yeah.
And then 10 years later, it looked like Times Square had blown up there in Berlin. It was really cool. I love Berlin. But
yes, I do.
we went out to a night, like some bar one night, and we were hanging out, and I tipped the bartender or whatever, and she looked at me like I was crazy, and I was like, what? And she's like pushed a couple of euros back towards me, and I was like,
It's too much, Yeah.
like, what? And she's like, it's too much. And I was like, oh, I was just giving you a tip. She's like, no. And so that's when I found out, I was like, tipping is not a big thing over there. And Allison and I were actually talking about this the other day, and I meant to tell her. So here's the reason why tipping's so important here in the United States. In the US, restaurants only pay their servers, their wait staff, like a couple of dollars an hour, and they work for the tips. So as I started thinking more and more about that, and I've never been in a wait staff, but everybody I'm friends with just about was a server at one point. My wife was, like so many people that I'm friends with were servers. And I don't know how the restaurants, how they work that out, and the restaurants all over the world don't do it that way. So I'm guessing they make a lot more money, or their margins are better doing it that way. I mean, they must be amazing comparatively, but the wait staff doesn't get paid that much, so they rely on those tips. Now, the tips can be awesome, and they can make more from tips than they will from, like, if they were making like $15 an hour, they can make more, making, $1.90 an hour or whatever it is. But they make so much in tips, especially on the weekends. So it's sort of this strange little economic and social.
But that's one of the interesting things about sort of writing books. And I'm pulling this back to books. I'm pulling us back to the title of the show.
Oh yeah, I thought it was just
sorry
beer.
about that.
And beer.
Beer and accents. That's next week, mate. That's on Thursdays. Beer and accents.
I cannot do impressions though.
But it's one of those things that actually is interesting in that when you write a book in a different country, or when you set a book in a place that you've visited, or where your characters go, getting something like that right is quite important, isn't it? Is to understand those little differences. So if you were to write a book in Berlin having not visited, you might put in something like that, the tip and whatever else, and now having gone, you'll go, well, actually, that shouldn't be there, or it should be the anecdote you shared about the server giving it back again.
Yeah, and when I can't go to those places, fortunately, I have a lot of friends all over, or from all over, and so I can ask them, what, like, is this customary here? One of the places, like, I wrote the Forbidden Temple, and that's set in India, mostly in Kerala, and like, I found out that John Dyer was his mom was from over there, And so, and she was a fan. And so I said, would your mother like to read this book like before everybody else? Like after my editors are done with it, I'm going to give it to her before I give it to anybody else. And he was like, oh yeah. So she read it. I said, I just need to know, like, am I getting all the cultural references right? Am I like, doing something wrong here? And no, she said it was spot on and it was great and she loved it. And so obviously I'm a genius, but Luke, I put my pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else.
I mean, it must be hard. It must be hard to be so clever, mate, all of the time,
The difference between me and other folks is when I put my pants on, I write bestsellers. That's just how it is, son. Yeah, no.
They just come out. They just appear,
But it's good to be able to have people I can ask. Like, you would be a resource too. But one of the things that I like a lot of things about you, and I'm not going to turn this into Ernie's man crush on Luke show.
Please, if you want to.
I knew from the moment I met Luke Richardson, he was not only a handsome man, but also very clever. No, one of the things I really appreciate most about you is like, how long were you in Riga, right?
3 weeks.
3 weeks, right? You lived there for 3 weeks because you were writing a story there, right? I mean, that was a big part of it. Maybe you were there for a funeral, and I'm just digging up old.
No, I was there for that.
So anyway, that's when we had to bury Aunt Louisa. So, yeah, but I love that about you. I want to do that more. And fortunately, I was able to, before I had a family, I was able to do a little bit of traveling. And, I saw 4 or 5 countries over there in Europe. And I've been to Greece too a couple years ago. And I've traveled here in the States, but I have to, there's still a lot of places I write about that I haven't been able to go to yet. And people have been the key. Like we talked about earlier, my students, like learning about all those places down in Mexico. Absolutely. They were coming from all these different towns and all these different places, and every one of them's different. And it was a shock to me as an American to, like, I would always ask my kids, because my kids would go, so many of them would go back to Mexico at Christmas time, and they would come back like a week after they were supposed to be back. So they're like having all these absences, whatever. But it was always shocking to me. I'd say, do you guys ever feel unsafe going back? Because all we hear about here is like cartels.
Yeah.
You're like, we never see any of that where we live. And, we've heard of that happening, or something happened with this one time. And I'm like, my goodness, why are they trying to like pull this wool over our eyes? But that's just one example of using people. That sounds bad. I like to use people to take advantage of them.
Being inspired by people.
Yeah. And learning about, all that you can learn. They can be your point of reference for so many interesting places.
And it doesn't take much, does it? I always think it doesn't necessarily take. You don't need to follow that person around with a notebook. It just could be a conversation, a few words. It could be it doesn't have to be a lot for you really to sort of understand that person and not understand the person, but take something from that person in terms of your sort of creativity in your book.
I'll never forget one of the most interesting conversations I ever had. This goes a little dark. Is that okay? Like there's a very sad, graphic, but powerful moment in this story. Can I share it?
Yeah, let's go for it. Let's do it. That's your trigger warning, ladies and gents. If you're sensitive disposition,
we write fiction about these kind of activities and these things happening. But I mean, these things have happened in a bad scale. But I was getting my catalytic converter fixed on my car when I was in high school, and I'm at this muffler place, and I'm sitting in the waiting room, and there's this older woman sitting next to me. And one of the mechanics comes in, said something to her, and he walked out. And because she said something back to him, and I'm loving accents, I turned to her and I said, "Are you from Germany?" And she said, "Yeah." And so we started talking as I was I was like, okay, she's this old. That means she would have been there for these things. And so we got to talking. This woman, not Jewish, she was there when the Nazis took over, and her father spoke out against them. Like, he was basically, you know, a thorn in their side. She told me that one night the SS came into her home, forced all of her family to march up this hill while they dragged her father up the top of this hill. This was where it gets bad. And then they executed him right there in front of the whole family, right? And I was like, whoa, what? I mean, I've never met this woman. Like, I don't know, but she's telling me this powerful story. And then she told me about how after that, they took us to a work camp that was sort of similar to what the Jews were forced to do. And, but it was, I guess, a little better, right? And because they would feed them or whatever. But as like a young girl, I don't know, 6 or 7 maybe, they were forced to get up at like 5:30 every morning to start working, and they would work until dark. And in these forced labor camps, and she was in one for German detractors, right? Like the Germans that didn't cooperate with the regime. And she's telling me this story, and I'm like, I had no idea that happened to a lot. As a high school student, I'm still learning a lot, right? And I was fascinated by that. But that story was one of the sparks that made me want to discover unlearned history or untaught history, right? Which is, you know, these things that I write a lot about in these stories where, you know, there's these, you know, treasures, these artifacts, these things like, you know, that sometimes they're real, sometimes they're imagined, but they're always based on real things that I have seen that not many people have talked about. But talking to that woman, I learned so much. And that was a big moment for me, not only as like wanting to learn more about untaught history, but also wanting to learn more from people. And so I always try, I know I talk a lot, and that's the joke in like all my friend circles and the writer circles, you know, Ernie, you talk. But I'm just trying to entertain people. I don't like attention, but I'm trying to entertain people. But the real thing that I always try to come back to is asking more questions than giving answers, because I'm always so interested in learning from people. And it might be because I don't get to, you know, I don't get to travel as much as I'd probably like to. But that is one of the things.
What interests me there in what you've said is that you're not describing the war, you're not describing the concentration camp. What you're describing is the pain of a daughter losing her father in a horribly graphic way. And that, I think, is the important thing from a writer's perspective, isn't it? Because when you're writing one of your books about, you know, an archaeological thriller or whatever, yes, of course you're going to bring in sort of political and geographical and other sort of issues into there, but ultimately you're telling a story about one person who wants one thing, who's doing something, you know, and that's the sort of gist of it, isn't it?
Life is a character-driven story.
Yes, I like that.
For every individual that's ever lived and that's currently living and ever will live, it is their character-driven story. That's why story-driven stories are great. And I try to balance that heavily with the character-driven. But that's why people, you know, like that's why character-driven stories, I think, tend to do better, is because it's an individual level kind of thing.
So here's a question that I'm sort of interested in from my own sort of development with my characters. So you've written, this is the 20th book in the Sean Wyatt series that you finished, or the 21st that you finished?
Yeah, I just finished book 21, Where Horizons End, for that series. I don't know how many books I've written, like 38 or something. But
it's just mad, isn't it? That's crazy. It's a lot. But you talk there about it being a character-driven story. So how do you make it then that Sean sort of develops in each thing, or he grows, or he changes? You know, is that something you even think about, or is it just the case that you're going to put him in this awful situation and off he goes? Do you think about what I'm trying to say is, do you think about the narrative as a whole over the series, or are you just like, here's the character, here's the nemesis, here's what he's got to go and do, or here's the MacGuffin, the object, here's what he's got to go and do.
I like the MacGuffins are my favorite things to find, and they're also the hardest to get those going. But the clues are really hard too. But yeah, so to answer your question, I think a lot more about that stuff now than I did originally. Because
I suppose you have to, because you would have run out of those initial ideas, and you've got to keep them coming throughout. Yeah,
but so what you're talking about, it's part of formulas that everybody uses, right? Like look at a Disney film, or look at the perfect example is Mary Poppins, right? Everybody thinks that it's a story-driven movie about this magical woman who comes in and makes things better, right? But it's not. It's actually about the father. It's a redemption story about the father.
Mr. Banks.
That's right. Saving Mr. Banks was all about that. And that's what it was. It was about his salvation, his soul's salvation, right? Because he had become a lost soul. And that movie was great. Not because of some, the magical whimsy of this, this nanny that comes in is cool and it's catchy and it gets everybody's attention. But she was sort of a MacGuffin. She was sort of just a way for us to learn to observe this man's evolution as a person and the redemption of his soul. And I think it was so clever. I really love the way Disney tells stories. And so coming back to your question, over the years, I learned more and more, not just with Disney, but a lot of great writers that write film, cartoons. I'm big into animation. I like animated series and movies. And that works out great because I have a 6-year-old. But they tell great stories, right? And books. I've tried to pay attention in books too. But it's easier to observe and absorb when you're watching a movie or a series, right?
Yeah.
And so those character arcs that you're talking about and how they develop and as a person, I don't always worry about that so much book to book, like as an individual book. Sean Wyatt's development as a character has taken place over 21 books, right? And it's been a slower character development with a few big moments along the way where you're like, whoa.
Yeah, okay. He realizes something, or some lifestyle, some change within his circumstances.
Yeah, like in the Templar Curse, there was this massive, crippling epiphany at the end. And he's had to come to grips with that, right? And so, and I'm not going to give the spoilers for that, but
no.
So I do think about that. But now with new series, like with the Relic Runner, with Dak Harper, with the Gideon Wolf series that's going to launch this next year, which is like supernatural, paranormal stuff, urban fantasy. Wow. I would not have believed that my readers would love urban fantasy, but they love this new character. I gave them the pilot last month. They loved it. So book 1 will be out sometime next year. All of that stuff, though, I do think more intentionally now about themes, right? Like, what is the theme of this particular story or series, right? How does it unfold to provide this theme? Because, like, if you watch a kid's animated series, like The Adventures of Tip and O, right? There's a theme in every single one, right? Like, Tip thinks that life is all about her, and she's the one that needs to be important, but she learns that her friend's just as important as her. And they both have opinions and things they like to do and all that. And they love each other in the end, all the more because of their experience in that 20-minute episode, right?
Yeah.
You observe those things, and then you start if you're being intentional as a creator, as an entertainer, you need to think about when you're watching those things, how can I apply that to my world, right? And I love reading fantasy. I love reading science fiction. And right now I'm reading a couple of books by J.N. Chaney, great sci-fi guy. And he totally gets how to tell a great story. And I'm reading these pages, and I texted him the other day, and I was like, dude, I'm taking so much from what you've done, and it's making what I'm doing better. And so it's really it. Yes, to answer your question, I do think about that stuff, and it's becoming more and more prevalent as I'm growing as a writer. I hope I'm growing as a writer.
Tell me a little bit about Gideon Wolf then. This is like a new series that you've. It doesn't look. It's completely separate to your original series, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no. As of right now, this would be like Deadpool jumping into the MCU, right? So
yeah,
which could happen. It could happen, but there'd have to be some interesting things to occur for that to work. So Gideon Wolf I write archaeological thrillers mostly, but this takes an archaeologist named Gideon Wolf and puts him into a paranormal shapeshifter, like urban fantasy story. And so the concept, I came up with this concept at a Mexican restaurant that some friends of ours own here in town, and I was talking to one of the owner's sons, and we were joking around. He's like, "Man, like, we really love your books. You know what you need to do?" I sound like Cheech. He doesn't sound like Cheech.
I was believing it. I could picture it right there.
He doesn't sound like Cheech. He goes, "You need to write a book. You need to write a book about your chupacabra." And I was like, "The chupacabra?" And he goes, "Yeah, the chupacabra." And I was like, "Yes, I do need to write a book about the chupacabra." And a lot of people don't know what that is.
I don't know what that is. Let me know. Fill me in.
It's sort of a lost legend, right? And so I'm actually trying to come up with a name. Allison and I have been talking a lot about this, and I put it out to my readers, a couple of ideas. But here's the concept of where I took that idea with the chupacabra. The chupacabra, traditionally, what that means is goat sucker. So it's like this dog monster that sucks the blood of goats. Well, that's a kind of a weird legend, and I don't really like that legend. So what I did was I created 7 medallions of power, and they're all over the world in hidden locations and places that only appear at certain times of day, and only certain people can find them. And so essentially Gideon Wolf is he's having this big exhibition for some artifacts that he and his wife found, and he ends up having to run for his life through the jungle in Mexico, and he finds this medallion, and he hears these voices, and he puts it on, and he becomes the chupacabra. And so he learns from this shaman, this guide, that he's not just some like crazy monster shapeshifter, that at night, if he chooses, he can become the chupacabra. And the purpose of the chupacabra and the other 6 monsters that we'll see later on in the universe are actually ancient guardians sent to protect humanity from the wicked. And so one of the chupacabra's powers is because he wonders, like Gideon Wolf wonders, how will I know who's wicked and who's not? And he's told that this red mist will form around the wicked. And so anyway, this cartel guy was wanting that medallion of power for himself. And so Gideon's got it. And so now the whole story unfolds, right? And he's trying to find the cartel guy. But then after that book, what happens next? Who's coming after him? Like secret agencies will be involved. Other bad people will be involved. And then it expands into another series featuring a new character that's found another medallion somewhere else, and she'll have her own backstory, or this guy will have his own backstory. And then eventually,
and they will come together in the final chapter, sort of thing.
Yeah, and then you can do however many Avengers stories you want to do with it, but that's the whole concept. And
so it's set in sort of present day, the world present day, as we'd understand it, but with these sort of supernatural elements in it.
Yeah, and so I'm also what I think worked for my readers was, I'm always trying to spin history into it or archaeology or something like that. And so I think it wasn't as abrasive as if I had just given them a vampire story, right? Like, hey guys, I just wrote a vampire story. Well, here you go. Or a werewolf story. So I think that helped, kind of ease.
Yeah, because there's that thread. There's that thread that runs through all your writing of the interest in archaeology and.
Yeah, and I told Jeff Chaney, I was like, I said, eventually I said I love reading sci-fi and I love watching it and I love playing video games that are sci-fi. I want to do a sci-fi archaeology story where I build this galactic universe of stories that has tens of thousands of years of ancient history. And like when you're watching Lord of the Rings, right? And they go into the Dwarven kingdom in the mountain and there's those statues and all those pillars and you're like, whoa, how old is that? Like, 15,000 years old, and what was that history?
But what I also really love is if you go to an intergalactic level, the whole concept of time is a moot point, isn't it? Because like we measure time on our own sort of whatever,
Right.
How many years is that? 12 minutes. That's 12 minutes old. I don't know.
Now seeing light from stars that were 5 billion, like that light left that star 5 billion years ago and it just got here, right? Like that's how much time's gone by since that light left its source to get to us. Like there's no concept. Let's talk about figuring out how we can open up wormholes safely.
Yeah. It's a fascinating conversation, a fascinating point of an idea is to put that into a story. Do you worry then? Was it a worry of yours that readers wouldn't come along for the ride? Like you said that they've been quite receptive to that. Did you think, maybe this is going to leave some people behind, or have you just sort of gone for it anyway because that's sort of a passion of yours to write that?
Yeah, so it is a passion, and I'm super excited about that whole universe because that'll be 50 or 60 books that build out on that universe, and I've got so many ideas for it. I'm real excited about it, but I always give my readers a pilot, and I'd never heard of authors doing this before, and it struck me as odd when I'm not saying I invented it, but as far as me, I'd never heard of anybody else doing it. So for me, I invented it. I was like, movies and TV shows do pilots or like focus groups. And like every TV show does it because they can't afford to lose. Like movies have investors, TV shows have sponsors. So it's got to be good. The ratings have got to be good. It's got to hit all the right tones. So they do a pilot. And maybe the pilot gets picked up and maybe it doesn't. So that's how I view these stories. So what I did with The Relic Runner with Dak Harper 2 years ago at Christmas, I gave all of my readers this free short story about this guy named Dak Harper. And overwhelmingly, people were like, what happens next? We want to know what happens next. Well, that was a pilot. I invested 22,000 words into that story, maybe 20,000 words, gave it to them and said, do you like this and do you want more? That's it. That took me a couple of weeks to write that. No big deal. Not even that. That's like a week's worth of work. So 1 week of work got me a proven story that I knew that my readers would enjoy, right? Same thing with Gideon Wolf. This was a bigger reach, right? It's a very different genre. There's no crossover there. And I was like, but this is something I want to tell. This is a story I want to tell. Do you like it? And it's been overwhelming. They've all, not all, but a lot of them. Enough of them have said, keep it coming for me to, I'd be an idiot not to.
But I also think, I think people read lots of different things. Like I think about myself and I think about the people I know who read a lot. I read mysteries, thrillers, sci-fi. I've read all sorts of things, dystopian things, all sorts of things over the course. I mean, there are certain things that I go to more than others. But actually, if someone I respect says I'm going to give this a go, would you come with me? I'd think, yeah, great.
Yeah.
You know, why not?
Yeah, if Stephen King wrote a cookbook, I'd probably buy it. I mean,
Yeah.
all right, let's go.
That's it. Yeah. Absolutely. No. It's really interesting. So you mentioned there that you wrote sort of a 20,000 word book in a week or a week and a half. Talk me through your process then, from inception of the idea to us getting it as readers. How does that? What is on that timeline, and how do you do it?
So the first thing I do when I finish a book, like I did on Sunday, is I book a trip to Peru, and I do a ayahuasca trip, and I
You must have a
myself.
great Peruvian accent then, ready to go.
I lose myself to the spirit guides in hallucination for a few hours. No. So while I'm working on a book, so right now I'm building out the rest of Gideon Wolf Book 1. While I'm working on it, in the evenings, I will be looking through National Geographic magazine.
Yes,
Right?
nice.
I'll be looking through the internet, through books, different stuff like that, and starting to formulate concepts around MacGuffins or historical figures that I'm interested in, right? So like right now I'm leaning towards Alexander the Great. And
Nice.
fascinating figure. Lots of guys in my genre have done it, and they've written about him and all that. But I want to do it. And that's the cool thing about my genre, is that everybody can kind of say what they think happened or what they think this has to do with, right? So I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about a couple of other ones, but I've got like an Evernote app where I keep all my ideas for figures or places or things, right? So as I'm working on one book, I'll start looking at those concepts for the other one at night. So during the daytime I work, and then at night, if I'm I haven't been able to play many video games recently, I'll start reading and trying to figure out what I can do. That's where the research begins.
But would you do that for a different series than the one you're writing at the current in the daytime?
Yeah, so I do the same thing. If I'm working on a Sean Wyatt book, what I would do at night, thinking about the Gideon Wolf book.
Yeah.
Which was
you wouldn't be thinking about the next Sean Wyatt book. You'd be thinking about something
That's right. So I was 2 weeks ago working on Gideon Wolf concepts and things like that, and I was doing still some research, still looking at locations, looking up ancient legends and mythologies and different myths and folklore and customs. But I start sketching out the outline. So that's what I'll do at night for a story like that, because it doesn't require 100 hours of research. So it's mostly just pure fiction. So I'll start sketching out the ideas for the scenes or where the story should go, stuff like that, so that when I finish Sean Wyatt 21, I'm rolling right into Gideon Wolf Book 1. And so now I'm on the process again. But when I sit down, I'll have about a third of the outline done in front of me. And I heard James Rollins does it this way too, that he outlines in thirds. So you give yourself the first act. And this is something that this was weird, because a lot of authors and people talk about like rapid releases and things like that. Well, I read a book, somebody way before all those guys wrote a book called Book in a Month. And I had the concept for the Sean Wyatt first book, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I'd started stories, but I'd never really I'd never really learned the process. So I read this book, and it outlined the whole 3-act structure and all this stuff. And the way that this book outlined everything, I was like, wow, I really could write a book in a month. I can do that. Now, my first book took 2 years, but like the seed was planted early on. So now when I set up my scene map, my outline, and like it's very thin. There's not a whole lot of detail to it. Like this happens here, this happens here. This is where this is going to be, and this is where they need to do X, right? And then I play inside that fence, and I can move the fence into the neighbor's yard if I want to, or whatever. But having just a little an idea of where it's going helps me write faster. So like the last 3 weeks, I've been averaging, I think, 4,300 words a day, which is good. But that actually only represents, coming back to Peter Gibbons at the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
That only represents about 2.5 hours of real actual typing, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
the rest of the time is thinking or running.
But it's like the guy, you know, the story about the guy who went to fix, essentially this idea of this guy who went to fix a ship, all right, and he the ship was broken down, and the guys called this man out to fix it, and he got a helicopter out, landed on the ship, went up to the engine, got a spanner, whacked it, and it started working again. And he sent them an invoice for $10,000 for his time, you know, and they said, well, why is that? And he said, well, you know, most of it, 9,950 was all the experience I've had to know where to whack the motor at the right point, you know. Yep. And that little bit was actually whacking it at the right point. And that's what you're talking about there, isn't it? Yeah. You know, the 2 hours that you spend writing is hitting the engine at the right time. Yep. All of the other time is those ideas, that creativity, those sorts of things that are percolating through your, you know, your sort of creative mind. Yep.
Another thing that helps too is I've always done this. I write better in sprints. So if I'm doing 15-minute chunks, I'm like 15 minutes go. I'll hammer out like, I think
when you do a timer, so you're strict on a timer.
Yeah, and I had it like yesterday. I think I had like 760 words in 15 minutes, and that's people are like, "Whoa, that's like almost 3,000 words an hour." I'm like, "Yeah, that's not going to happen." I feel like the next 15 minutes was 500 words, but it helps to do that. But it also
so you do 15 minutes, then you have 15 minutes off, or do you have off?
No, I'll take like two. I'll just take a minute and then go again, right? Like I'll just If I'm in a good groove, I want to stay in that good groove. I don't want to be interrupted.
But you make it when that timer goes off, you make yourself stop and then restart. You know, you don't just ignore it and keep going. You know?
But one of the things is that helps too is at night or at the end of my workday is to stop wherever I am. Like if I say no, today 4,000 words is good enough. That's good.
Yeah.
Like I have a minimum of 3,000. But I'm really trying to push for 4,000 as my new minimum right now because I'm trying to put out 10 books next year. So
that's impressive, isn't it?
It sounds like it when you say it that way. Yeah. But it's just work. I mean, like everybody works, right? So I mean, that's what I tell people. I'm like, if your job of 40 hours a week was comprised into books, you would have produced like 15 books, right? Or 10 books or whatever last year. So I'm actually quite lazy now that we think about it. But, no, but yeah, so one of the things that helps though is stopping at a point where I'm not complete with that chapter yet.
Yeah,
so
I do this. Yeah.
I don't like to finish a chapter and start the next day with a blank page. It's really helpful to start in the middle or towards the end of a page that's got something on it. Then I can see, okay, this is where I was. Oh yeah, this is what she was thinking. And now I'm going, and then I finish that chapter and I'm still rolling that momentum into the next page. That really helps.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do exactly the same. Mate, this has been absolutely fantastic. We're at 1 hour and nearly 10 minutes. Let's have a quick look through the comments and then we will have a final little chat. Yeah, Steve says, no, I've loved your talking. Your writing pace is almost identical to mine. He just did NaNoWriMo and wrote just under 60,000 words. That's a big number. In 30 hours and 43 minutes, he added up all of his times that he'd done that. Mad. That's a lot, isn't it?
That's a lot. Yeah. That's a really strong. I mean, if you think about that, break that down into a day job, right? A 40-hour work week. He essentially wrote an entire novel in less than a week.
Yeah.
If you really,
but I mean,
that's so cool, by the way.
There are a lot of things that we do outside of actually putting words on the page, though, aren't there? You know, in our businesses, in our lives, you know, all of this sort of thing. Whilst this isn't work because it's a pleasure, it still is time, and it still is part of that. You know.
Yeah, I mean, you're cutting into my writing time right now.
I'm sorry, mate.
No,
you
I'm
could
just
have
kidding.
done.
I'm just messing.
You could have done 10,000 words in this.
I'm just messing about. I'm just messing about, mate. No, I'm kidding.
Ray says the Relic Runner series you gave us fans. Oh yeah, we talked about this. The episode copy and invited comments and corrections.
Yep.
And we're going to finish with Alison's random question. I like Alison's random question. She does this every show. Would you ever consider killing one of your main characters? I'll start.
I was going to say you start.
Yeah. No, not at the moment. Not one of, because I write my main characters are Leo and Alyssa in my series, and at the present time I wouldn't consider killing them. Maybe in a future book, maybe when I'm 10 years down the line, something might change, or I might write a different series in which I might consider killing them. But not those two. No. What would you think, Ernie?
I am 10 years down the line, and to Allison, I'll answer your question with a question. I just finished Sean Wyatt 21. How do you know I didn't kill all of them?
There you go.
You guys,
there you go.
You've been wonderful.
I suppose you don't. Imagine that. Bought the book.
No,
it's one scene. It's one scene, you know. Sean was trying to... Red wire, blue wire. Red wire, blue wire. Red wire. Bang. 200 blank pages.
That's when the plane hit the mountain.
Yeah.
So the question is, would you ever consider it? Yeah, I've considered it. I've considered it a lot. And I tease my editor, Jason, with every single story where I'm typing and I'll say, and then she pulled the trigger, Tommy's head exploded and his body collapsed. And I'll keep going for like totally wasting time, right? But and then I'll type up a couple of sentences after it that would fit with the story, and then I'll take a screenshot of that and send it to my editor. I finally killed Tommy. He's like, what? The first couple of times he believed
you can't do this.
Well, I did it I did it to Adriana, right? And he was like, you got to be kidding me, man. You can't blah blah blah. And I'm like, it is what it is, buddy. And then when I finally send him the manuscript, he's like, I hate you. You made me thought that you really did it. But no, the truth of it is, artistically, storyistically, it is an incredible character shifting catalyst to the ones who remain to kill off a character. That's why every television series does it. That's why every Disney movie basically does it. 90% of their stories start with an important person's death, right? Because it shapes the motivation of the main character, the protagonist. And so I don't like saying protagonist and antagonist. I say hero and villain. That's what I say. I don't know why. It's my thing. So if you're in the middle of a series or you're real deep in a series, like Sean Wyatt is on 21 right now, I could continue on this track for a while, maybe another 20 books or so, but eventually they're going to start getting stale. They're going to start not developing and changing as much, right? And that'll get boring to people. Well, what's a cheap and fun way to change that? You kill off somebody they care about, and now all of a sudden they've got renewed motivation and all this. The problem is that in character-driven novels, readers love all the characters. They don't want to lose any of them because they're all real people to them.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? That's true.
So when Steve Barry killed off Thorvaldsen, there was a huge revolt from his fan base. Don't get me wrong. He still makes $12 million a year, and they're all buying his books. They were not happy. And he actually put a question out at one point. If I could resurrect any character from the Cotton Malone universe, who would it be? And they were all Henrik Thorvaldsen. Everybody wants that Dane back, right? But so it is probably the right thing to do at some point,
Yeah.
just for the development of the series, the characters, or whatever.
Yeah.
And nobody can live forever. So
No, I agree with that, and I think you're right, because you see the other characters coming together, and as you say, those things do happen, and Ray makes a point here, which I don't know I agree with, actually. Having the main character die of cancer or a random accident or some kind of illness, then the characters are left to move on like in real life. But I like the idea that if that were to happen in one of my books, it would be an integral part of the story. It wouldn't. Random accidents don't really happen in story. Imagine if he just got run over crossing the street, and that would be so anticlimactic, wouldn't it? That it would be unsatisfying,
Well, was it? So I've always loved James Bond because I love you. I love y'all's
Allison's
accents.
just talked about that. Unless you're James Bond, yeah.
I love y'all's accents. So super agent with a British accent, perfect. I'm in.
I knew we'd be friends.
And the way that Ian Fleming constructed that character, and the way that the films have taken over and portrayed him, has been awesome to watch. I've enjoyed. Some people complain about certain movies or whatever. I'm like, look, I enjoyed it because it's still the character I love, right? Whoever is playing that 007 character, I like that person. I like that dude, right? And so I have not seen No Time to Die yet. Sorry, I haven't seen the new one yet. But it's like, what was it? Casino Royale, where the woman drowned. Like he was trying to save her, and he was in love with her. Like he was really into her, and she drowned. But she had betrayed him. And even after that betrayal, he was still trying to save her, still in love with her, like that. The human side of James Bond, is so powerful in that movie, unlike any of the others. Like he was a real caring individual. And after that betrayal, and after her death, it forged him as the hardened killer. Yeah, Vespa. I wanted to say Vespa, but I also didn't want to call that was also what he called a drink. So
I agree with you completely, and I really like that in the Daniel Craig era of the Bond movies. And it's not to say that I didn't like what Pierce Brosnan and the guys before him did, but he brought a real sort of vulnerability to him. And one thing I quite liked, and I have seen No Time to Die, and you need to go and see it because it is a brilliant movie, is that he almost, I think a lot of the older Bond films, he was by our current standards, you'd see him as a little bit of a sleaze. Oh, yeah. The idea that he's like, picking up 3 or 4 women over the course of a 2-hour movie, and then for them to switch that around and him to be so besotted with this woman, even though she betrayed him, as you well said, even though he's surrounded by beautiful women, he's not able to move on from this one who he quite clearly loved. It's a real interesting reflection on the change of times over that sort of period.
That one really hit me hard too when Vespa dies. Like you could see him, he's like, all of a sudden he realizes she just breathed her last breath, and the look on his face is in like disbelief, like no, like you said vulnerable,
and you're like,
just perfect vulnerability, right? Devastating vulnerability. And I loved Daniel Craig as 007. I know everybody loves Connery the best, but I really, and I grew up with more, but I think like Daniel Craig the best because I just like the way he carries himself. And they really had him built like a tough dude, and he's a good looking guy. He also's got sort of that easy charm, and like he seemed less sleazy maybe to me is what it was.
Yes, but I almost think it's funny, isn't it? Yeah, he's less sleazy, but he almost like, what I like about it is that you get the impression that he doesn't quite fit in the world in which he is in.
Yes.
Which is which is such a great way to put it. So essentially what they've done is they've taken Roger Moore from the 70s or wherever he was the bot and put him in the you know, the 2010s.
Yeah.
And they've just set him off. And he's doing all these like wisecracks. And everyone's just like, huh?
Yeah.
Who is this Joker? You know, who is this guy? You know? And I think that's brilliant because the diehard Bond fans like you and I get that. And we think that's really amusing. And the kids who watch it now just think it's funny anyway because he's being knocked back, you know.
Right.
Very, very, very clever. Yeah, yeah. And I like the lack of one thing I do like in this new era is the reduction of sort of technology. When we got that in the Pierce Brosnan ones, he was being shot from space by a blooming laser in a car on a glacier, wasn't he? You know, you know. And it got to a point where it was like there was like an arms race, like a James Bond. What next can happen? You know.
Yeah. How big? I mean, they'd have to go to Mars at some point. Like they'd have to get to Mars and have something going on there.
Yeah,
like the North Koreans they're so poor because they put all their money into developing super weapons on Mars or something.
They're great films. And but actually, do you feel? And I know we've gone well over time. Apologies. Do you feel now that because you've been writing for 10 years and you wrote your first Sean Wyatt book, you know, longer than 10 years ago, do you almost look back and feel that they sort of reflect the time that they were written? Is that long enough for you to look back and think? Because times have changed from 2010 now to 2021. Do you see the change in the world happening over the course of that time? That's really deep.
No. Yeah. So deep question, one word answer. Yep. We do see. So I include in every story usually a little vision of the future, at least with Wyatt. Relic Runner is different animal. The other side stories, I've got spin-offs. Those are different. The Sean Wyatt story has a timeline that has tracked over the last decade. But when I wrote The Secret of the Stones, like it was a pandemic story, right? From an American terrorist. And there's the spoiler, but I still get emails from people who say, especially last year, I got emails from people
I bet.
who read it and they were like, I had to check when this was published, and it says like 2014. I don't know why it says 2014 because it was originally 2011, but I'm like, yeah, it was like 10 years ago. And I was really writing it like 12 years ago because that's when I started. It was 2008, and so some of it, yes, some of the stuff that I come across in my studies and history and things like that, I connect dots. Sometimes with secret societies or conspiracies, or sometimes with just timelines of things, and I say, well, what would happen if this happened, right? And I was talking to A.G. Riddle a couple, like, I don't remember, earlier this year sometime. And we were texting and he said something about Winterworld, his book Winterworld. And I think it was Winterworld. And I was like, yeah. So I said, I'm so glad you wrote this story because I had the concept for what would happen if there was another ice age, right? Like, what would it look like now if there's another ice age? And there will be another ice age because, like, that's the cycle of Earth.
That's the way
right?
the world goes. Yeah.
People, look, I'm not disparaging global warming. This is climate change talk now. I know it's getting hotter, but it's been getting hotter for a long time. And eventually it will get colder again in a bad way. So don't get too excited about cooling things off because eventually Mother Nature wins. Like, she will correct things, all the things that we screwed up along the way and her own things. And then there's going to be another ice age. And I love that Riddle wrote Winterworld because it's kind of like it's kind of like that, right? So
is it? I've not read it, but I know the film The Day After Tomorrow, which is a similar idea from what
we just
from what
chatted briefly about it. Yeah. Yep. So no, but I love the concept, and I'm glad that he wrote that. But it's funny when we're like, tracking through time, I guess, sometimes we get a little ahead of things. Like we start seeing things. I don't know if you experienced that, but have you ever like written something that was fiction that turned out to like later on it came true?
Good question. I don't know if that's the case, but what I have noticed is I've written something in fiction which has been inspired by something that's happened that I didn't realize has been inspired by something that's happened. For example, in my book Hong Kong, there is there's this sort of delusional property magnate who wants to redevelop a piece of land in Hong Kong that is lived in by the poor Cantonese people over in Kowloon, and to get rid of them, he burns it down. So he disables all the fire alarms and sets fire to it, and they all run away, and then he's got the right to redevelop it into posh apartments. And I realised afterwards that this was in the same year that we had the Grenfell Tower fire in London, so just down the road from me, which was a fire in a very poor part of London in a tower block, and there was a lot of questions asked about whether the fire alarm system had been correctly installed and all these sorts of things. And at the time, I hadn't tied the two together. I hadn't thought about the tie, but somehow that had entered my psyche, and perhaps that was the reason it was there. But yeah, it's not predictive, but it's a link somehow.
To that end, it's interesting to try to like. So lately, and I talked to another writer in Las Vegas about this, I haven't been reading as many thrillers lately.
Yeah, a bit dark.
I don't want to accidentally plagiarize, right? Like I don't want,
right.
Not you would copy, like not pure plagiarism, but like I don't want to like be reading, because people have asked me like, are you really Steve Barry? Because there's a lot of similarities between, and I'm like, no, I said, it's weird because it was like, I became a Steve Barry fan after I started writing my stories, right? And so they're like, hey, this reads a lot like Steve Barry. And I was like, oh, I should check out Steve Barry. So I did. Now I'm a big fan of his. But I was, Clive Cussler was my original inspiration. That and Alexander Dumas were like my two biggest inspirations for my fiction. And so I just, now I don't really read as many thrillers because I'm like, I don't want to like follow too many things that they were doing just by accident. So
yeah, that's true, isn't it? That's true.
So I have to be careful with that. But I'm also intentional about using things that are going on in the real world. So back to your original question, throughout time, through the last 10 years, every book that I've released was based on a season that I was living in. It might have been spring, so it's Sean Wyatt in the spring, right? Or it might be Christmas, and that's what's happening at that time in Christmas. So last year when I released, or early this year, January 1st, when I released the Milestone Protocol, it was an after the virus book, right? So it was like into the future, the virus is gone, and now what happens next, right? And so I'm trying to stay with the times and treating the present as the past, so that when I'm releasing my books, there are those, like sometimes people are like, well, how did he know this was going to happen right now? Like, well, it's easy. It's like I tell my wife all the time, Luke, I know everything, honey.
Particularly when you make it up. I know everything when I'm the person in charge of the universe.
I did catch a little bit of heat from a few people on Milestone Protocol because I mentioned the deep state, and I call the deep state the ruling class. And this is just my belief, but it just feels like we're walking through a dog and pony show all the time. Like you guys have more, but we're given two presidential candidates that we can choose, right? The people don't choose them. Well, yeah, you have primaries, and but those people still didn't get nominated, right? We're still nominating this person.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I started really believing it was a sham, like 7 or 8 years ago. And I'm not being political or anything, but like
no,
as I do more
it's good
research,
to be honest.
as as I study more and more history and I learn more of the untaught history that is legitimate history, I'm like, oh, wow, we are all being played. And that is brilliant by the ruling class. But you have to ask yourself this, Luke. At what point in human history would a person with absolute power say, screw it. I'm going to let the commoners decide what's best, not me. Well, there was the French Revolution and there was this revolution. Sure, there was. There were those things. They did happen. But you can't tell me that like people with power and wealth and influence ever are going to be really willing to let go of those things. Like that's in a bunch of scriptures. That spans Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism. Like the hardest thing for a rich person or a powerful person to do is to let go of that power, right?
Yeah.
So do we live in a democracy? We like to think so, but that bothers people that I posed those ideas. They're like, "Oh, you're in QAnon or what?" I'm like, no, I don't even know what.
But I think as a writer, we get to pose those ideas without being so direct with them, because we're not saying this particular president or this particular prime minister is a what. No. We're saying we're putting them loosely veiled in a fictional form and saying here is someone, you make your judgments about what you think about them. Do you know what I mean? And actually, once you remove that from the person, it becomes a lot clearer, I think, to the reader that actually, hold on a sec, are they talking about my guy or your guy? No,
and I never. So I don't get political because I don't believe it's real, honestly, and so I just just look at our last. This is political, and I'm going to piss off people on both sides. Look at the last two guys we offered. The last two guys we were given, right? Both sides think they're crazy, insane, ego, horrible people, all this stuff. And are both sides wrong? Are both sides right? Like, you don't know who to believe. I never attack any real person, right? So I don't like make fun of Donald Trump or make fun of Joe Biden in any of my books. I don't use real figures unless they're historical. So like, maybe I'm at the point now where I'll use Ronald Reagan, right? Or Jimmy Carter's still alive. So
Hoover or one of those, one of those
historic
Roosevelt
figures, right?
Yeah.
Real historic figures of leadership, kings, presidents, prime ministers, whatever.
Sure, you talk about Hitler or Mao or Stalin,
Yeah, sure, but I don't use current ones, and so because I use fictional presidents and prime ministers and ambassadors and things like that. I come up with the names, I create their own little backstories, and I do it that way. But even then, people are still like, you sure sound like you're getting a little too conservative or you're getting a little too liberal. Or I'm like,
I think you can't please everyone, can you, in those sorts of things? And I think there's a real surfing, isn't there? Because I think you want a book to be edgy enough to engage people, and you want it to also not annoy people, not wind people up. So there's a real sort of balancing act between those two things. Yeah. And I think also someone said to me recently is the opposite of love isn't hating something, it's being apathetic towards it. So actually, if indifference, so if someone responds in that way, actually, they've really enjoyed your book because they've engaged in it at that level.
Yeah, but it's just funny because like I don't have a political stance, and I have personal beliefs, but they all like most of them fall right in the middle. Right? Like I just my political and personal beliefs are. Be nice to people, do right by people. And don't be an a-hole unless you're being an a-hole to be a funny a-hole, right? Like like my wife calls me that, but she's laughing while she calls me that. So that's sort of that's where I stand. Like, you want to do this with your lifestyle? I don't care. That's your life. That's your human experience. Let everybody have their human experience, unless they're harming others, right? They're harming, stealing, whatever, then that's not okay, because that's messing with a human experience. But other than that, I don't care what you do. I don't care what you're growing, who you're with, what you look like. Enjoy the ride.
Yeah,
because it's a short one.
And on that beautiful sentiment, I think it is time to wrap up Books and Beer, the longest show I think we've ever done. 1 hour, 34 minutes. You just wanted to beat Thacker, didn't
Kevin
you?
Tomlinson and Nick Thacker. Hey, real quick, can I ask you this just before you go?
Sure. Oh, is it real quick, or is it another 15-minute question?
Do you believe that Stephen Moore would make a good James Bond?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. 100%. He's got the look about him, that blue steel, hasn't he?
Oh, he's gorgeous.
You know, look, yeah, with the hair and the, you
look good. But like you look more like the transporter, no offense. But like
yeah, Jason Statham,
one of my favorite actors, by the way. I love him.
That's a compliment. I'll take that.
Oh, I love it. But I feel like Moore would be the perfect Bond.
There we go. Well, it would be the second Moore to be a Bond, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It almost runs in the family. Maybe that's relevant. Yeah, maybe it's a relative. Ernie, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining me for giving up part of your afternoon to watch me drink beers and talk about all sorts of rubbish.
I enjoyed watching you pound those beers, buddy. Are you down? Do you have 4 down or 5 down?
I think 4. Yeah, or maybe 5. No, 4. Yeah, 4.
Hey, is that a chart in the background of with strings attached where you're going to be connecting plot lines next?
Something like that. Yeah, something like that.
Below it, like where your can is sitting.
Oh yeah, and there's some holiday photos, some travel photos on the wall behind me.
He's putting together conspiracies. I see.
There you are.
Where's your next story going, Luke? Where are you?
I will tell you in a minute. I'm not going to tell anyone else. We'll talk about this in a moment. I will be back for more Books and Beer next week. I haven't found out. I haven't decided who I'm going to have on the show yet, but I will.
Can I go click on that date and do it myself?
You do it double Ernie. In fact, if we split this one in half, it will be about the same as a normal conversation, wouldn't it?
I'm so sorry.
No. I've loved it. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. I will see you next week for some more Books and Beer. Ernie, you're a legend. Good night.